Well, hello and good morning to everybody. Welcome to the All Portable Discussion Zone. It's a bi-weekly live stream all about amateur radio portable ops. My name is Charlie. Call sign is November Juliet 7 Victor. With me this morning is Dan, KC7MSU, one of the show's co-hosts, and unfortunately Brian, W7JET, had a conflict, so he won't make it today. I'm also pleased to introduce to you today's guest, Nick Wood, M0NTF. Welcome, Nick. And of course, as always, we have the regular characters in the chat, although it's a little thin today. I'm sure people will be rolling in. Welcome to you. We're happy you could join us. And also to those of you who will listen a little bit later on the stream or on the podcast. And don't forget, we have this podcast converted to a podcast about 24 hours after the show airs, and it's on most podcast players. So you can listen to the audio or watch it or whatever you want to do. So let's get going then. Dan, what have you been up to the last few weeks?
Well, couple things. I've been working and doing a little bit of Python programming, primarily on the Pi platform. So I'm kind of working out some concepts for some stuff I want to do that's kind of amateur radio adjacent before I try to implement them onto a ARM processor. So hopefully that'll translate to some extent, maybe. And then right now I'm just kind of getting ready for the Arizona soda camp out that starts this weekend.
Okay, cool. I'm going to be there as well. That'll be a lot of fun. So for me, just yesterday, I went out with a friend of mine, Brad, and we did 3 10-point summits. Or, well, no, actually, it was 2 10-points and an 8-point summit out in the Prescott, Arizona area. It was a good time. We had success there. I enjoyed being with Brad and activating. Before that, it was just I think 2 days before that, we just got home from visiting my family in Wyoming and in Utah. So we'd had a week there. And so I've been having a lot of travel time, actually. And that's part of the reason why I haven't posted a lot of videos up here on the YouTube channel. I've had just back-to-back trips. We did a week in Wyoming, Utah. Then we had St. George for the Hamfest there. Then the first year they're doing the Hamfest, HamCon Zion. Then it was a week in Hawaii before that. And I mean, I could just go on and on. Almost all summer has just been travel. So having a good time, but not a lot of time to build and create videos. But that is going to change because we're done traveling for the year. So that's me. Now we have our guest here, Nick. Welcome to you. And what have you been up to?
Thanks, Charlie. Well, not a great deal because we've been on holiday and I did take a bit of a break for a couple of months really from making any new YouTube material after I finished the build of that last transceiver, which took a long time, over a year. I always say, to build things, I could have built that transceiver 3 times. In fact, Bill Mira was building a transceiver for 10 and 15, and he did rebuild his twice in the time it took me. But that's because I keep stopping after every module and making a YouTube video about it. So after the last one, and I showed it working, I said, right, I put one old one up that I'd recorded, but then I said I'm gonna, just take a bit of a break from it. So I have done. Having said that, I have started messing around with. Interesting. It's really great to have Charlie Morris, ZL2 CTM, back making YouTube videos. He had a long hiatus of about a year when he did, and Charlie's been hugely influential in my kind of homebrewing journey, really, which I can say a bit more about later. But yeah, but he's been doing some stuff on building. Well, he was building a commercial AM receiver, but he was using an analog VFO. And I've had some bad experience of building analog VFOs, but I thought I'd give it a go. So I actually built his design of a Franklin oscillator, and it works remarkably well. So actually, I'm in the throes of building what at the moment it's a direct conversion receiver using Charlie Morris's Franklin oscillator. And is pretty stable. It's certainly the most stable analog VFO I've ever built. So anyway, I've been playing around with that since I've been back.
Okay, very good. Let me just take a minute. He does have a great channel too. Let me share my screen here just for the folks who are watching and show you There's the channel, Charlie Morris, ZL2CTM. Look at all these great things, some toroids there, and some air core capacitors, all kinds of good stuff. So yeah, check that channel out. Of course, we will be talking with Nick here a little bit later, or maybe even right now, or whatever, about his channel. He has a great channel as well. But maybe we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's just start off then, Nick. Again, thank you for being here. Let's talk about maybe some of your past a little bit, because it's always interesting. I find it fascinating how people their journey to get from point A to point B. Were you involved at all in electronics or ham radio as a younger person, or when did you kind of pick that up and tell us a little bit about your career and how that might have influenced where you're at now.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on. It's wonderful. No, I didn't. I've always been interested in electronics, and as a kid, I had electronics kits, and particularly radio. I've always been fascinated with radio, and built some crystal sets and the rest of it. And later on, in I suppose the late 70s, I had a brief flirtation with CB, like a lot of people did, and which was great fun. And over the years, I suppose I've kind of picked it up and put it down. So I've never really properly studied it, and really, I'm kind of doing that now. I've had to go and play catch up, really, because I realise I've learnt a lot doing what I'm doing, but there's big gaps because I never really learnt it properly in the first place. So I'm going back and studying the basics, really, because it is fascinating. So yeah, I mean, a big influence actually, I think, was probably my granddad. Now, my granddad was not a radio amateur, but he was an absolute home brewer. He was a radio operator in the RAF during the Second World War, and so he was trained to kind of, and they basically had to. I mean, we found actually the notebooks that he took with him when he went to war, and these huge big, the separate transmitters and receivers, and they had to basically learn to strip these things down and rebuild them with whatever they could find. So he knew what he was doing. But when he came back, he built all kinds of things, lots of heat kits, and I've got some of those. But also he built his own television set when nobody had a television set, with a little green ray tube. And it's an apocryphal story, but apparently, all the neighbours came round to watch the coronation of Queen Elizabeth on this tiny little green screen. With this thing that he built himself. So that's some pretty hardcore home brewing. Really. But I remember as a kid going, and they lived in a bungalow. And you'd never get away with it with health and safety in this country now. Really steep wooden steps up to the loft. And half the loft was dedicated to my nan, and she hoarded all kinds of stuff. But the other half was a door, and my nan was not even allowed to go through this door. And you go through this door was his workshop. And it was, and I just remember as a little kid looking up and going, wow. And from the floor to the ceiling, it was just all test gear and components and stuff. And I was like, wow, just being in this place. So I think some of that wonder of that must have kind of rubbed off on me, Yeah. But anyway, so I kind of picked it up and put it down. What actually really got me into ham radio, weirdly enough, was we'd moved house. And I was trying to, I was fixing up a TV in the kitchen, but there was no coax connection for the aerial in the kitchen. So I thought, it's going to have to be an internal TV antenna. I thought, I could buy one. And something popped up on YouTube about building your own TV aerial with a pie dish, right? With a foil pie dish, right? I thought, no way, this is but I thought it got me interested enough to try it, and it worked, right? So I built this TV aerial out of this pipe. This is amazing, right? So then I started kind of researching other kind of aerials and what else you could do with aerials and things, and I kind of got into being a shortwave listener for a while, and so I got a little SDR play RSB 2, discontinued now, and which was great. I listened to all kinds of things. Did the old thing with the dump 1090 on a Raspberry Pi and decoded the aircraft signals from the transponder, so you can plot where the aircrafts are flying overhead and all that kind of stuff. So really fascinated. But gradually, the further I got into all of this, I kept coming up against ham radio, and ham radio was coming. So eventually I decided I need to check it out. So I went along to my local radio club. It was in the November, I think, of 2017. And said, well, look, I'm interested. And more or less, as soon as I'd walked through the door, they said, right, we'll sign you up for your first exam. And the rest, as they say, is history. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. Very good. Well, so that was a question I had early on when I was watching your videos, is how does this guy know all this stuff about electronics? Sounds like you are self-taught and you just tinkered and figured it out. What resources did you use other than YouTube to figure all this out?
I mean, I bought a lot of books and read a lot of stuff, and I just got some great advice. I mean, we're very fortunate. I like to say, really, that I think that the home brewing community in ham radio is some of the kindest and most generous people. So, I mean, people like, one of the earliest people I reached out to was Hans Summers of QRP Labs. And because, I mean, on his website, before he started QRP Labs, he did all kinds of tinkering with all kinds of different stuff. And he's got it all up there on his personal website. And I was doing some stuff there because he did some stuff about huff and puff stabilizing for analog VFOs, which I built one of those, actually, completely over-engineered, really, for stop a drifty VFO. But yeah, so I reached out to him. Pete Giuliano, I mean, I count him really as a friend, and we correspond, even though I've never met him face to face. We've swapped ideas for a while. I mean, it was such an encouraging guy, really. And I reached out to him when I was building my first transceiver. No, it wasn't even a transceiver. It was a super het I was building.
Oh, okay.
But I was using some of his schematics that were actually for a transceiver, but for the kind of the IF section. And I just couldn't get my head around impedance matching. And I'd wound and I was trying to do it with these toroids, and I wound them all wrong, and I got the wrong toroids, and so I asked him about this, and he gave me this fantastic detailed reply, and he says, I know you've asked me the time, and I've told you how to build a watch, but I'm so glad that he did, because it was that kind of encouragement that was just really brilliant, and I had some great encouragement locally as well from some of the chaps in my club. We got a couple of good home brewers there as well, and they were very encouraging. And so I've kind of learned it as I've gone along, and very often you come up against a problem. You think, well, actually, I just don't have enough knowledge for this, so I need to stop. I need to go away, and I need to learn more about this and find out. But I did find that it makes a big difference, because because as you do in the States, we have a kind of 3-tier licensing system in the UK,
right?
And when I was doing the final one, what we call the full course, there was just basically me and one other bloke, and it wasn't really a kind of taught course. It was one of these ones that they were just doing kind of reviser sessions, really. And I felt sorry for it, because this guy had no interest in building at all. He really just wanted to do the course because I think he wanted the greater privileges and higher power and the rest that brings. And he really felt like he was being made to jump through hoops and to do all this electronics and maths and stuff. And there's a fair bit of it. Whereas for me, I'd already built my first scratch-built transceiver by the time I was, sitting that exam. So when I was coming across what can seem like these pointless equations, I was thinking, oh yeah, no, I get this, because this is how I get my mixer, and so I think it's the difference is when you build stuff, you see the relevance of, and it stops being dry academic stuff and starts being tools that help you do things. And as Pete Giuliano often says, when you know stuff, you can do stuff, and that's the truth. And so actually, I've kind of learnt as I've gone along, as I've had to, basically, because what usually happens is this: I think, oh, this looks really cool, I'm going to build it. So I build it, and it doesn't work. So then I have to spend time thinking, why doesn't it work? And even now that still happens, but now I've got more idea about what to do when it doesn't work, and actually to use the oh dear it doesn't work as a learning opportunity to find out why it works and how it should work. And
Yeah, well, okay, so that brings up a question. Playing on that last comment, what methods then have you learned to do as like for troubleshooting? Say you have a
Yep.
piece of electronics that you built. Like, let's say you built a transceiver and you went start to finish, you got it ready, and then all of a sudden you turn it on and no output. So how do you tackle that?
I think this is where the way that you build makes a great difference, because like a lot, probably virtually all scratch builders, I build in a modular fashion. So I build it module by module and I test it, I get it working, I put it aside, I go on to the next module. I build it, it doesn't work usually, so I get it working, I test it, I tweak it, then I put it with the first module and get them to play nicely together. And if they don't, I work out why and then fix that. So actually, by the time I get to the end, I shouldn't get any nasty surprises, because I've been gradually adding this thing and ironing out all the problems as I go along. Now, having said that, there is a well-known curse of the enclosure, which is if you build things as I do, and most of my radios, with the exception of the last one, which I built it within the little blue box as I went along. But usually what happens is I build them separately, and it's a rat's nest of wires and modules and stuff all over the bench, and it works. Then I have to break it all down and shoehorn it into an enclosure. Then it doesn't. And usually that's because it's usually something annoying, like some wire has come disconnected, or possibly you put something that was far apart from something is now a little bit too close to something else, and a bit of RF's getting through where it shouldn't be, or whatever. But the answer is you break it up again. So if there's a problem, you think, okay, let's think logically. What am I seeing? What could possibly produce that issue? And you break it down slowly. And generally speaking, if you do that, you can trace it, and you can do that in all kinds of ways. I mean, you can use a multimeter if it's as simple as that. And I've even gone to the point, actually, when I've really had a problem with one particular module, and I know what the problem, where the module is, I just can't find the problem. I've even simulated in LT Spice, and simulated problems. And actually, I found a problem by doing something stupid in LT Spice and thinking, if I shorted this bit down here, what would happen? That's exactly the problem I'm seeing. And sure enough, that was exactly, I couldn't see it until I got a magnifying glass out. And sure enough, one bit was actually shorting to another. So there's different ways that you can actually do it. But the question is not to panic, but is to go back into modular mode and test each bit again, even if it means breaking it apart, and seeing what the problem is and trying to find out where it is. Because once you've found where the problem is being generated, it's a much easier thing then to actually track it down what it is. But to be honest, it's a very good question. And I always say to people, it is the hardest and most important part of scratch building. The hard part is not building an SSB transceiver. Yes, all right. It's a big deal building an SSB transceiver from scratch, but that's not the hard bit. The hard bit is resisting the temptation to pick it up and chuck it in the skip. And every single radio that I've built, I've been through that thing of, I just really want to put a very big hammer into this blooming thing, right? Because you do. But what you have to do is just put it aside, walk away, leave it, think about something else. And suddenly you'll think, hang on a minute, didn't I? And you'll go back and fresh pair of eyes, it'll work really. But it's having that tenacity to find the faults. I always remember something that Hans Summen said. I think it was a recording 4 Days in May a few years ago when he was there, and he said about somebody asked him about the reason why QRP Labs succeeded, and he said the reason I succeeded, he says, I was just too stubborn to give up. Right, and I love that. He said I was just too stubborn. I just wasn't going to let it defeat me. And I think for me, that's it. And sometimes you have to just forcibly walk away, think about something else, do something else, and go back to it. But you will crack it. Ultimately, you will get there in the end. But it's having that staying power to actually see it through. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things. And it's hard to teach people as well. But it's something you have to just develop. It's a skill you have to develop.
Yeah, for sure. Dan, anything you have? Any questions?
No, I agree with him. I've used LT Spice on something that a couple times that I've built, and it's like, okay, this thing is not working, So I take what I had sketched out on paper and put it into LT Spice, and it's like, okay, my waveform does not look anything like that. So then it's a matter of trying to figure out why, and it's kind of fun because sometimes you get into all kinds of oddball things that you aren't expecting, like parasitics or something like that, and so it's kind of fun and interesting, the tools that are available. I understand that there's another tool that's a simulator like LT Spice, and I was just trying to find it. I saw the name of it once, and I wanted to try that one as well, but it's also an open source simulator as well.
Yeah, cool. All right. So next question for you, Nick, is what was your first homebrew radio? If you have it around, maybe you can show it to us. If you don't, just kind of describe it. Tell us what it might be.
Oh, can I get it? I might be able to. Excuse me one moment.
All right.
It's going to cause a landslide.
It's buried. It's buried in all the stuff.
It's the project box.
Okay, so here it is. So this,
right.
Let's just get the lid off.
Wow, it's a Christmas tin.
It is. So this.
Oh, look at that.
So
that is cool.
This is a 40-meter superhet. It uses, you can probably just see the SI5351 Arduino Uno. It uses it, and I've mentioned Hans Summers a few times, really. I bought one of his bandpass filters. You can probably just see here, which was a kit.
Yep, I see it.
And I have to confess, ever since then, his instructions are so good. I've just used his instructions and built my own because his instructions are just so good. But this was what I had to ask the illustrious Mr. Giuliano some help with. And actually, it was Pete really that said when I got it working, and I sent him a short video of it working. He said, Nick, he says, that's brilliant. He says, now do you know? He says, you only need a few more modules, and that could be a transceiver. And that's really got me thinking, could I actually build a transceiver? And so the next thing I built was his sudden transceiver, his 40-meter sudden transceiver to basically to his design. I mean, I'm pretty bad at kind of freestyling. I mean, one of the advantages of building like this is you can freestyle. So, if you don't like the audio amplifier very much, we just build another one, right? And put yours in. If you like yours better, keep yours. And, so I've got loads of odd modules and things that I look at and think, oh, I could use this for something, because I built it, but actually I've built something else. So this, it took me a long time. What you can't see there is underneath that tape. I think, I'm not sure what module that is, but I have trouble getting them all in here.
What's with the electrical tape? A
bit of gaffer tape on those. I think the thing with this was, and that I got into quite early on. Bill Mira's going to hate this, but is is dealing with the microcontrollers. Because I built so many, and as I say, I've just built an analog VFO that is halfway decent. But for most of the time, where I started, because in the UK they've changed it now, but when you did the intermediate course, you had to build a project. You had to submit a project that you built, and a lot of people build a VFO. So I started building VFOs, and they were all terrible. It's just some were more terrible than others. I mean, one of them, you could fire it up on the bottom of the 40-meter band, go away, make a cup of tea, come back, it'd be at the top. Built a scanner.
Wow.
But it was so drifty, and it's really hard. It's possible to do, but you need to build it so carefully and to actually get it. So I quickly got a bit frustrated, and I was really interested by stuff I was seeing, people like Charlie Morris and others that were using digital stuff and microcontrollers. And so I did, and I messed around with another one, but I latched onto the SI5351 and yeah, never look back,
Yeah,
really. And it's such a great thing, and just the power of what you can do with a bit of code and an Arduino, which is great. And so I've got, I mean, most of the time I still use Arduinos, even though there are much more powerful things out there. The exception being, I'm not going to lift this down, but I did build, which I think was probably the third transceiver I built, is the most complex thing I've ever built, which was a tri-band SDR, so direct conversion software defined receiver. So now this was based largely on Charlie Morris's stuff, with a bit of some other stuff he did and a bit of my own stuff thrown in as well. And this thing's quite a thing, you know. So I mean, basically, you just down convert the signal to your I and Q, and then it goes into a teensy microcontroller, a very powerful microcontroller that does all of the filtering. And so, so then I had to kind of master how do I, you know, make all these Hilbert filters and to do all this filtering and the rest of it, which was really interesting actually. And I think one of the things that fascinates me about building radios, unlike a lot of other forms of electronics, is that, you know, when you think about electronics, you just think, well, electronics is electronics, right? Well, it's not. And when you get into it, you realize it's a massive world. And some people never delve in the other bits, right? But if you're going to build a radio, you've first of all got to get up to speed on RF electronics, which a lot of electronics guys are not. That's the bit they don't know much about, actually. But the RF, because it behaves differently to a lot of other stuff. You also need to know about audio, because you're going to have, you know, microphone amplifiers, you're going to have audio amplifiers. And you're going to need to know general stuff, of course, because you've got to power it, you've got to switch modules and, you know, relays and stuff. But also, if you're going to do something like this, then also you're into the wonderful world of microcontrollers and programming in C++ and you know, and all. So actually, your horizons widen, and actually, it does mean that, I mean, I've gone on to build lots of non-ham related projects just because I've gained experience and knowledge from doing this stuff. Because once you got the knowledge, you know, you can turn it to anything. So I think that's the wonderful thing. There's so many different avenues you can take once you start going down this, and the permutations are endless, really. You know, you're never going to have enough time to build all the things that you're interested in and you want to build. But it's fun to, you know, try a few different things and see how you get on.
Yeah. It sounds like, from what you're saying, that you just need to pick up a project, then any electronics project, if you have no knowledge whatsoever. You're completely starting from a base of zero, nothing. You don't know what volts means or whatever. You just need to pick a project and start with a simple project. And as you are building that project, you have to, you know, do some research here, do some research there, and that continues to grow and grow and grow, and just kind of snowball into a great knowledge about what you're looking at.
Well, I think the thing is, if you've got no knowledge of it at all, I would highly suggest you build some kits, because that will get you proficient at basic things like soldering and basic fault checking and just understanding how it works. But the second thing is, and this is a really important lesson, and it was a hard one for me, but is you don't run before you can walk. So, you know, the temptation when people start, and I had it at one point, was, oh yeah, can I build a transceiver? You know, and I realized once I started messing around with Arduinos and SI5351s, just a minute, this is a steep learning curve here, right? I need to put everything down, forget about radio, and just spend some time with the Arduino, how it works first, and then like get an LCD screen and then get a rotary encoder and try and work out how that works, how you're going to fix these things together, because otherwise it's so big, and if you set the bar too high, you won't make it. You'll get hacked off and discouraged, and that's not what you want. And, you know, so I'm always encouraging people to have a go, but start small, do something small, and then build it up. So the thing I always talk about, and everybody always says, is about a direct conversion receiver. And I've done several talks to different radio clubs about building a direct conversion receiver. Some of them have been analog things, some of them have been digital things. but it's great because essentially it's just 4 modules. You know, it's a mixer, it's some kind of VFO, it's I've missed one out. A filter and an amplifier, an audio amplifier, and so you can spend some time, you know, getting comfortable with these things. But once you've done that, and that's what I did here, I built a direct conversion receiver, but then I converted that to a superhead. So that was the next step up. So you build a product detail. Well, there's a product detector in here, but you know, you build another mixer, and you build a crystal filter, or you buy a crystal filter, and some IF amplification, and then you go to the next stage, which is a transceiver. So then you're thinking about microphone amplifiers and power amplifiers, and you know, but it's, you do it a bit at a time. And I think if you do that, the good thing is you build something, you finally get it to work. It's a great feeling when you get it to work and you can listen to, you know, signals on your radio. And then finally you'll get to that point where you can attempt the big project. But I think if you can rein yourself in and try and just concentrate on a small thing and do that well, then that's a good stepping stone for successful, you know, bigger projects, I think.
Yeah.
And have fun. That's the thing. The other thing I would say is the big difference, of course, when you're scratch building, apart from building kits, is that you're on your own. You know, no one's, you've got to make your own board. I mean, I tend to use the Manhattan style, either sticking little pads on or etching things out with a Dremel, you know. But you got to make your own board. You've got to get all the right components. You've got to do it yourself. If it doesn't work, well, the great thing is there is a whole community of home brewing hams who are only too keen to help and give advice if you get stuck. So although you're on your own, you're kind of not on your own, because there are lots of friendly ears that are willing to listen and to help you out and get you going when you're stuck. And we all get stuck at some point.
Yep. Cool. So I have a comment here. And by the way, those of you who are watching live, please, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and we'll get Nick to answer them. This is from William Carter. He says, I built a K1, and then his call sign is, let's see, is that a call sign? It's not. It's an OHR 500, which I guess that must be, what is that? I don't know what that is. But anyway, it's a NorCal 40 back oh, it's another one already. A K1, an OHR 500, and a NorCal 40 back in 2000. He says, it was embarrassing. I still have the K2 not finished, and that was back before the FTA 17. If you wanted to do QRP, you had to build it. So he's saying back in the day, if QRP radios were only available through maybe kits and homebrew, I suppose. Yeah. All right. So what's your favorite receiver design? Is it regenerative, direct conversion, superhead drawing?
I confess I've never built a regen. It's something that's on my kind of to-do list. I always kind of fancied having a go at it. Generally, it's a superhet.
Yeah.
It was interesting doing the SDR with the I and the Q and doing the sideband cancellation, you know, in the software. And mine was pretty good. In fact, mine worked better than Charlie's did himself, I think, really, in terms of the opposite sideband rejection.
Yeah.
But it's still not as good as a good crystal filter, in my opinion.
But those are tough.
And some radios have both, of course. They have, like, you know, an analog front end and a, you know,
right
software back end, really. But
yeah. All right, Dan, anything else at this point?
Well, I've been watching your dual band build series, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. I like how you present things. What do you think was the most difficult module to really get working to your satisfaction out of that series? So
yeah, that's a good question. Strangely enough, the thing I had most issues with was the thing that I didn't think I would have any issues with at all, which was actually the power distribution module. And I think it's because I was trying to get a bit clever this time. So I actually did the switch. So I kind of got a software PTT, really. So it just kind of grounds a pin on the Arduino, the PTT. And what I got is a bunch of software switching. So I'd got modules being switched on with a certain delay between. So I wanted all the relays to be in place before I started squirting RF through, you know. So I kind of did some of that. So, and I don't always do that. Sometimes it's a purely hardware solution to that. So that kind of complicated matters a little bit. I mean, I think I was all right with the mixers this time, but I mean, this is probably the first transceiver that I can really honestly say that about. Most of the problems, I think, in all of my builds have been with the mixers, and not getting sufficient carrier suppression and so I've done lots of videos about this really, and fascinating really, but a lot of it, particularly if you're using diode ring mixers, and I tend to kind of homebrew my own diode ring mixers, but is about the IF port seeing 50 ohms, and which, if you're using it as a product detector or modulator, is the one the audio's connected to. And I always used to spend a lot of time and effort worrying about the other ports seeing 50 ohms, putting diplexers and things on it, but not on the audio one, actually. And that has made an enormous difference. There's a video I've got where I've tested some mixers, even commercial ones as well, that have actually not fared very well. But Roy Llewellyn, of antenna modeling fame, had a design for this little audio diplexer, which basically just makes sure that the audio sees 50 ohms. It's only about 4 components, and you stick that onto the IF port of your mixer, and my goodness, it makes such a colossal difference to the way they operate, particularly as a modulator, because I usually test them both ways. So things like that, but I wish I'd learnt that four transceivers ago. Yeah. It would have saved me a lot of pain. And it's I think the other thing as well is the other problem that you can very often have is when your amplifiers, because particularly on the transmit chain, where you're taking a tiny signal from the microphone and trying to make it bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually you put it out through your antenna. It's not doing too much. You make it a little bit bigger and then push it onto another stage and let make it a little bit bigger, because earlier on I said, I'm going to build an amplifier. It's going to really crank out loads of dB, but it just turns into an oscillator. And that's the truth. And I did. The rig before this is the shelf, so-called shelf 17, because I literally built it on a wooden shelf.
How about that?
It's actually about this long. It built al fresco on a wooden shelf, so you can see all the modules. But there, I used Pete Giuliano's, what he calls the steerable IF section. So that means that you get it's not bi-directional. You get one-way traffic through the IF, but you switch on the ends of it which way it's facing, if you see what I mean, on receiver or transmit. The problem with that is that the input and the outputs, when you're connecting them to relays, you've got a very, very tiny input close to a very, very powerful output, and of course the chance of the Barkhausen criterion being met. Yes. And the input starts feeding into the output, starts feeding into the input, and you've got an oscillator. And so that was a real pig, and I had to do a lot of shielding on that to actually get that thing to work. I got there in the end, but it wasn't simple
because of your tenacity, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's those things you learn as well, which you don't see on a schematic, because you see it laid out in a schematic, think, well, that's fine, and you model it in LT Spice and it works. But it's those physical things when you're actually building, which you don't always bargain on. The stray capacitance, if you've made the leads a bit too long, all these things can have an impact that you hadn't bargained on.
Yeah, Okay, so yeah, Bill Carter says anyone can learn to build kits. And you mentioned that kits was kind of the place to start if you don't know anything at all. He says that I'm a CPA, no electronics background, thanks to the Elmers who helped me. So that's good. And then he says that Tuna Tin 2 is a great way to start building. There are a lot of good simple kits out there, and that's one of them. Yeah. And then do you know Mike Smith, G0RFD, by chance? Because he says hi. He says hi all.
Hi, Mike.
Okay. Cool. Anything else, Dan, before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I was kind of curious, now that you've got a lot of digital and you do some microcontroller stuff to control your radios. What kinds of tools do you like to use to do your programming, and then also troubleshooting, especially what your program is doing versus what's really happening in the circuit electronically?
Yeah, and the problem with introducing digital stuff is when it comes to problem solving, because sometimes you think it would be really obvious what was a software problem and what was a hardware problem, but my goodness, when I've been building things, and I absolutely said, what is the problem with this? I'm testing all this. Why have I got a problem? And it was a software problem, and likewise, so software problems can masquerade as hardware problems and vice versa. So actually, it can be very difficult to actually to do that. And personally, and maybe it's just because. I'm not saying I'm an expert builder, but I'm probably a better builder than I am coder, to be honest. I have studied computers for years as a hobbyist and things, and programmed in a few different languages and things, but I'm not by no means an expert at it. I can just about kind of get by, but it's difficult. So in terms of tools, I don't really use anything to I sat next. Well, I was sat at a meal once, and I got talking to a chap next to me, and I asked him what he did, and he says, "Oh, I'm a software engineer." And I said, "Well, I do mess around with microcontrollers." I said, "But all I do really is pinch other people's code and adapt it." And he turned to me and says, "What do you think I do all day?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Google.
obviously, there's a fair bit of that, isn't it? Of taking, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're taking some good code and we're tweaking it and adapting it. And yes, all right, I might write a bit of original stuff, but it's not going to be anything too groundbreaking.
Well, that's actually true of the components as well. I mean, the schematics, you take a schematic that's already been done, and then you build it pretty much the same, and maybe do a little bit of here and there differences, but for the most part, yeah.
Especially if something's an older design, right? And there's chips that help you with a particular function, and now you can improve what was there originally.
Yeah, I know. And even if I do, occasionally I do design things really from scratch. So I'm not working on anybody's schematic, but it's something like an audio amplifier or a simple RF amplifier. It's going to look exactly like anybody else do. So I'm not doing anything groundbreaking. It's just I'm working the biasing out myself or whatever, So it gives me a sense of satisfaction, but it's not anything different. Yeah. Likewise, some people will. I'm a keen listener to the ham radio workbench podcast.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And they very much will. They wouldn't do a. I can't see George doing a Manhattan-style construction.
No.
He'll design it in Eagle and send it off to China and have the Ford Sprint.
Yes.
Which of course you can do. And I have tried that a little bit, and that's actually quite fun. That's another whole avenue. You can kind of go down PCB design. And again, I'm very much a novice at this because somebody asked me to do a video about that, and I said, look, to be honest, I'm barely able to do it myself. I'm certainly not competent enough to instruct you how to do it, but I pointed them to some good videos of people that can. But I have done it Where I did it was which one did I do it for? Oh, I think I did it for the 1510. It's because in the latest iteration of Farhan's BitX, when Wes Hayward and Bob Kopsky designed the termination insensitive amplifier that gets used throughout that design, I built that module so many times, and I knew I was going to be using it a bunch of I needed a good 5, 6, 7 of these modules going into this rig. So I thought, why don't I just design my own PCB? And so I did. So I took their design, designed a PCB, and sent it off to a fab house in China, and got a load of boards printed up just for myself, just to save me a bit of time, building the same module over and over again, which is what I needed to do. But it is good fun, and it's quite exciting when you get your boards.
Yeah,
even better when they work. But yeah,
I actually, I was telling you off before we started the show that I went to my community college to learn a little bit. One of the classes that I took, that we actually etched our own board. So basically, we went into Eagle and did our design, and then we printed it on a piece of what is it? Ink paint? What is it? Laser, not LaserJet, but the other one, ink press or whatever it is, and then laminated it on the top of a regular board, and it kind of used the acid to take off the parts of the board that we didn't need, and basically it was an etched board, but with chemicals and stuff like that. It was kind of an interesting project.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, you just learn as you go, and there's different things. If you dive into a project, you're gonna make it happen eventually over time. Just don't get overextend yourself, and that's all good. I wanted to ask you about your YouTube channel. Can you talk a little bit about what it is and how did you get started in that, and just kind of the whole thing about right around the YouTube channel?
Sure. Yeah. Accidentally, I guess. It happened during COVID, and when I was due to be giving a talk at the Flight Refueling Amateur Radio Society, which is my radio club, and as I couldn't do it because we were all locked down, and I couldn't do it. So I decided that just to kind of, and most people were just sat at home bored, not able to do anything. So I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make a video and I'll share it with the radio club. So I did, and I put it up. It was on my own personal channel then. It's before I developed the M0NTV homebrewing channel, and so I did a few of these, and then I got. Oh, I presented at the GQRP Club convention, the first one that was the completely virtual one, and that seemed to go down pretty well. And so I started making these a bit more widely available and telling people about them. And people said, "Oh yeah, these are right." So in the end, I decided I'd have a separate channel for it. So I did, and so I started putting these videos up, and kind of go blow by blow really through me building a project and the different things that I've learned and things. I suppose I kind of make the videos that I wish I'd seen when I was starting out, and telling you about things that you might not know. And people saying you wind a toroid. Well, how do you wind a toroid? And what difference does it make if you don't do it? And it's a lot of kind of practical things which, when you know it and you've been doing it for a while, you kind of don't think about. And I gradually got into more of the explaining how it works. And so it wasn't just this is what I built, but it was kind of, if you're wondering how it works, this is how it works, and that seemed particularly to go down well with people more and more, and so I've tried to kind of keep it a mixture of both, really. So it's all my stuff is inherently practically based. So and where I talk about electronics theory and things, I'm basically doing it so I can equip people to go and build something. It's not just a whole bunch of formula or whatever. So it's so that's how I kind of got into it. I never for a moment intended that it would become really what it has kind of become. And in a way, in a way, I feel a bit of a fraud, really, because I am the amateur in amateur radio. I mean, one, I've not actually been a ham for all that long, and I've got no training in electronics. And as you know, I'm an ordained minister in the Methodist Church, so I do this stuff as a hobby in my spare time. But I'm just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by it, and I think, well, it's just, and if I find it fascinating, I think, well, maybe I can help to share, and if I can encourage somebody else who's thinking, well, that looks good, but could I do it, to just give it a go, because I think it's been such a fascinating journey for me, and I was helped so much by people around me, people like Charlie Morris and Pete Giuliano and so many
Bill
folks
Moran,
who kind of inspired me and encouraged me to give it a go. Then I think, well, it's kind of paying it back a bit, really, into the hobby. So that's where it is, and we're up about 4,500 subscribers now, which seems crazy, really. People that want, because I mean, ham radio is pretty niche. Ham radio homebrewing is even more niche. Ham radio homebrewers who want to watch me talk about building radios must be a tiny proportion of the population. So but there it is.
Well, here you go. Here's John K8VNA. He says to you, where have you been my whole life? Your videos will be distracting for me from other projects for a while. I built my first project just last week.
Oh, well done, John.
All right.
And then he says, your newest subscriber. Thank you, sir.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you. And that's
very good.
And that's what it's about. And actually, funnily enough, most of my subscribers are your side of the pond, interestingly enough. I have far more subscribers in the US than I do in the UK. And maybe that's just as there's more ham radio homebrewing going on your side of the pond. Who knows? But
hard to say.
Wherever we can get it going.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, for sure. Dan, do you have anything else, or shall I move on to the next question I have?
I'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, so, well, let me just point out we have 8 minutes left, but we're not on the heels of anybody else. So if we go over just a little bit, I hope you're okay with that, Nick. We may or may not, I don't know. But next question is, well, you answered one of them already. Was kind of who inspires you, and you've mentioned these people already, so we won't ask that one more. Beat a dead horse on that one. You've mentioned, all the great ones, Pete Giuliani and Steve Hartley and Bill Mora and others. There's quite a few others, and then some of the ones who have passed on, like George Dobbs and all that. So good. That's kind of the same heroes I have. So what about your projects, your homebrew projects? Which one are you most proud of?
I think the one I'm most proud of, if I move out of the way, you might be able to see it, but it's actually it's this red bread bin under here. You can probably just about see. We call them bread bins in the UK, but it's a metal box, really. That's what I call the optimizer, because it's essentially, it's like a Bitex, really. It's a tri-band 80-40-20, but you've got to manually change the filters to change the band. Okay, so it's not flicker switch, but I spent more time. Now it's not as complex as the so-called really useful rig that was the SDR that I built. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not as complex as the SDR, but I've had more good signal reports from using this rig than anything else. It puts out 10 watts maximum on 80 meters, so it's a QRP rig. But it's and there's more filtering in this radio than any radio I've built. And I think it's a kind of counterintuitive, really. When you first start building radios, you think, okay, I need to build the most powerful amplifier and things. But actually, the things I've learned that have been probably most important are attenuation and filtering, which is kind of, you think, really? But actually it is. It's dropping it down and narrowing it down. And actually that can, if you can filter your signal all the way through, you ain't got to worry about what's coming out the power amplifier, because it's so clean going into there that, a low pass filter on the power amp, it's going to be great. And it does. And people say it sounds really brilliant. And so of all of them, I think probably I'm most proud of that, because although it's not the most complex, it sounds the best, and I think it stands up alongside, any QRP transceiver, really, apart from the fact you've got to change the filters yourself. But
Yep. Cool. All right. So the next question then I have is it stems from our guest here that's in the chat right now. And that is, I like Nick's method of wrapping and tinning toroids. Everyone has a fear of toroids. Any comments to the new builders dealing with toroids? Thanks, Bill. And also, before you dive into that answer, let me just bring up again, share the screen here and show our viewers, you listeners will just have to go and look for yourself. But there is a video here of Nick's method of winding toroids. And so, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about what your method is, and then if you're interested, go ahead, guys, and go over to his channel and check it out. I think it's kind of near the bottom or middle, at least.
Yeah, that's number 12, isn't it? The first thing is make sure you've got the right one. Now, for some things you can probably get away with, but most of the time, if you're building a toroid and it's going into a filter, if you've got the wrong one, it's not going to give you the results that you think. In terms of size, size basically just means you can get more inductance and more power handling, the bigger it is. But also the type as well will determine how well it functions at certain ranges of frequencies. So you might get one that would be better off on the lower HF bands, but would be rubbish for the higher HF bands. So you need to make sure you've got the right ones. So get them from a reputable supplier. But when you've got that, is don't be scared of them. They're not going to bite you. And so the fact is, people do all kinds of things, put them on pencils, but for me, the simplest thing is you just take your time and wind them tightly to get that kind of transformer action, if you like, or the induction going the way it's supposed to. It's got to be tight against that toroid. And the two things I would say is make sure they are evenly spaced, and I break my own rules with this sometimes. I'm afraid to, because if you don't, then all those little wires you'll get all this mutual capacitance between the wires as well. So make sure they're evenly spaced around, and also leave a gap between the in and the out. So really, you want to leave at least a fifth of the circumference of the thing. Probably maybe even a quarter if you can, depending on how many turns you've got to get on that toroid, and try and keep the in and the out separate. So if it's secure, when you're building things like bandpass filters, the best thing to do is to put on more turns than you need. Put a couple of extra turns on, because you're going to be desoldering it and taking turns off, and that's part of the process to get it working the way that you need. So make sure that you can trim it down later, that's fine, but make sure you've got more than enough turns. And then when you're happy with the way that it functions, then really you don't want it to move. So at that point, you need to seal it. There's different ways of doing this. What I used to do very often is you can get some of that nail polish enamel stuff that people put on top of the nail varnish to stop it from cracking, and go over it with that because it sets hard. I've got some of that UV glue stuff knocking around that you kind of put it and you seal it with a UV light and whatever. You just put a tiny little bit of that around and that will set. People use candle wax, whatever, but the idea is once you get it the way you want it, you don't want it moving around, because then your inductance will change and your frequency will change. So but take your time, and as I said, don't just in your mind, you need to think, I'm not going to build this once, because if you're building a low pass filter, but if you're building a bandpass filter, no, you're not, right? You're going to be taking it off. You're going to be readjusting it, putting it back in, and because that's the nature of the thing. But it's like anything. The more time you do it, the easier it gets.
Yep.
And you just get into a routine of how to do it. But it's one of those things. Even if you're building a software-defined radio, you're probably going to need some filters, right? And so you can't escape toroids really, and so the trick is to learn to befriend them.
Yep. You got to tackle them at some point. All right, Dan. Any other questions you have?
Well, toroids are. I always have a problem with them. The biggest thing is I can never seem to get, them wound tightly so that you benefit from it the most. But I tried, after I got it kind of wound up, I tried just hot glue, and even that seemed to work pretty well as far as making sure things don't move. But have you ever tried? I've seen copper wire that is actually square in nature. Have you ever tried to see the difference between that and the round as far as it?
I've never even heard of that, Dan.
No.
Yeah, I saw it a couple weeks ago. I was like, that's kind of interesting. But it was in bigger sizes. It wasn't in, in finer wire gauges. So I think they use it mostly for like wiring transformers. I think is where that comes from.
I think the other thing that people go wrong with as well, which I did first time you build one, is about, if you're using enameled copper wire, the clue is in the enamel, right? So it's not going to conduct. You've got to, and I tend to do a two-pronged attack. I get what we call a Stanley knife, a sharp knife, scrape the end of that wire until you can see it's shiny, so you've got the bare metal underneath, and go over and make sure you scrape it properly. Then I get the iron blisteringly hot with everything they tell you not to do when you're soldering. Put the solder on the iron, get a big blob of it, and just go up and over it, and you'll burn off any enamel you missed, and you'll also tin it, so it'll obviously solder better as well. And then get the multimeter on it and make sure that it's it's conducting where it should be.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's see. John has another comment here. Oh wait, here we go. Let's so first of all, Mike G0RFT says you use flat wire in power amps. Okay. And then John, I watched a video from Hans where he adjusted power output on one of his QMX pluses by adjusting the windings on a couple of toroids in the QRP. It's off topic, sorry, he says. Well, this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. You got to leave a few extra winds in there just in case,
that's
right?
Probably, that's probably in his power amplifier, I would think, because that's a lot to do with, your final.
Yep. Cool. All right. You know what, Mick, we've already got an hour in, and we haven't really even touched the surface. It doesn't feel like, but we can't. Everybody's got things they got to do, so we'll just call it at that. So, Dan, any final parting thoughts from you?
No, this was a great episode. I appreciate Nick coming on, and it's so homebrewing is a tough thing to. But it's got a lot of fun things in it too. So I appreciate you coming on, and your channel is great. I encourage everybody to go out and take a look at it. There's a lot of good information out there, to build modules and put them together. So a lot of fun stuff out there.
Thanks very much.
Very good. And I too am very grateful. I just recognize real quick Tim, my friend Tim K7KOM. He's a great soda operator, and so he's been watching. Thank you so much for being here. But especially Nick, thank you for accepting the invitation to come on board. Hopefully I've established a relationship with you, so when I get stuck, I can reach out and find out what the heck I can do to get some help from you.
Of course, absolutely.
Good.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Any parting thoughts? And then, by the way, once we end here, just hang tight and don't hang up, so we can catch you on the other side. But go ahead and close us out.
No, just thank you very much for having me on the show. It's really great, and just as I always do, try and encourage people to, if they're interested in giving it a go, and starting small and picking something that's achievable and breaking it down into tiny bite-sized chunks that they can do. And it's a whole wonderful world that you never dreamt of, which is there, and a whole bunch of wonderful people that you would have never come into contact with as well. So it's a great blessing, really, to be a part of the homebrewing community, and would encourage it to anybody that's interested in giving it a go.
Okay, great. All right, Nick, thank you so much. Dan, will catch you in a minute. And so thanks to everybody for watching. Again, catch us a little later if you haven't had a chance to watch this at the podcast or just wherever. I really appreciate everybody joining us. We'll say 73 to you, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. 73.